Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have another interesting story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Harvey, and this is the story of how a single joke destroyed my marriage. I was married to Susan, a woman I once believed I would spend my entire life with. From the very beginning, we both knew we wanted children. Even before getting engaged, we would spend hours talking about our future, how many kids we would have, what their names might be, and who they would take after. We imagined a big family, lively dinner tables, and messy playrooms filled with toys. I could already picture myself teaching my son how to ride a bike or reading bedtime stories to my daughter. Susan loved kids, too. She spoke about them with so much excitement, often showing me videos of adorable toddlers and saying, "One day, that will be us." When we finally got married, we didn't want to wait. We had spent years envisioning the kind of family we wanted, so as soon as we said our vows, we started trying for a baby. At first, it was exciting. Every month felt like a fresh start, a new opportunity. We turned it into a little game, playfully guessing whether we would have a boy or a girl first. Susan brought home baby name books, and we would sit together, imagining what our child might look like, whose features they would inherit, and what kind of parents we would be. But as the months passed, nothing happened. At first, we brushed it off, thinking it was just a matter of time. People always say, "Don't stress about it. It'll happen when you least expect it." So we try to stay relaxed, telling ourselves that the right time would come. But as months turned into a year, and then two, the excitement started to fade. The game we once played turned into silent hope, and then into unspoken disappointment. Each negative pregnancy test became harder to ignore, and every passing month felt heavier than the last. By the beginning of the third year, doubt settled in like a weight on our shoulders. We stopped talking about nursery plans. The baby name books were pushed to the back of the shelf, forgotten. Susan tried to act like she wasn't worried, but I could see it in her eyes. Conversations about children, which once made her smile, now made her uncomfortable. She would change the subject or give a forced, tight-lipped response. We couldn't ignore it anymore. Something wasn't right. After 3 long years of waiting, hoping, and pretending time would somehow fix everything, we finally decided to get checked. The tests were simple, just routine blood work and a few other exams. We waited anxiously for the results, hoping for a minor issue, something that could be easily fixed. But when the doctor finally sat us down, his words felt like a punch to the gut. "Harvey, your sperm count is extremely low. Right now, it's nearly impossible for you to conceive naturally." I sat there, numb, unable to process what he had just said. My heart pounded in my chest. Susan was beside me, staring straight ahead, silent. The doctor kept talking, explaining that I wasn't completely infertile. There was still a small chance. He suggested boosters, a strict diet, and regular exercise to improve my fertility. But all I could focus on was the one thing that mattered. I couldn't give Susan the family we had dreamed of. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my whole world had collapsed. I had failed as a husband. What kind of man couldn't even give his wife a child? Susan told me she wasn't going anywhere. She held my hand and said, "We'll figure this out together." But as the days passed, her actions told a different story. She started avoiding conversations about babies. When friends talked about pregnancies or showed off pictures of their kids, she would quickly change the subject or walk away. I understood why. It was painful. But the real challenge was that when something like this happens, she held on to her anger for days, sometimes even weeks, while constantly directing passive aggression toward me. At first, I thought she was just trying to process everything just like I was. But then the little jabs started. "I just don't get it. How can 2 healthy people struggle to conceive?" She blurted out one evening over dinner, shaking her head. Maybe if we had started earlier, things would be different. They were small comments, thrown casually into conversations, but each one cut deeper than the last. At first, I feared she would leave me. It was just a passing thought, something I pushed aside. But over time, it became an obsession, a weight pressing down on me from the moment I woke up until the moment I forced myself to sleep. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I was overthinking. but the signs were everywhere. Susan wasn't the same. She started coming home late, always with some excuse. I grabbed dinner with the girls. I just needed to clear my head. At first, I believed her. But then it became a pattern. She spent more and more time outside, barely speaking to me when she was home. She used to kiss me goodnight, used to fall asleep with her head on my chest. Now, she barely looked at me. The warmth in her eyes was gone. One night, I finally asked, "Susan, are we okay?" She sighed, rubbing her forehead like the conversation itself was exhausting. "I don't know, Harvey. I just wish things were different." That broke me. I had done everything I could. I took the boosters, changed my diet, exercised every day. I followed every piece of advice the doctor gave me. But no matter what I did, I couldn't fix us. The silence in our home grew louder. Some nights, I would sit in the living room, staring at the pictures on the wall, the ones where we looked happy, where we still had hope. Now, the house didn't feel like home. It felt like a waiting room for the inevitable. And every time Susan opened her mouth, I braced myself because I knew another jab was coming. It's just frustrating, you know? Seeing everyone else move forward while we're stuck. Maybe we weren't meant to have kids together. She never yelled, never outright blamed me. But her words sliced me open in ways no argument ever could. I wanted to believe she was just hurting, that this was her way of dealing with it. But deep down, I knew she was already halfway out the door. One evening, Susan and I attended a small gathering at a friend's house. It was a casual backyard get-together, nothing extravagant. Just familiar faces, music, and conversations over drinks. I wasn't in the mood to socialize, but Susan was enjoying herself, drinking more than usual and laughing a little too loudly. I sat back, watching, trying to blend into the background and simply take in the atmosphere. At some point, the conversation shifted to children. A couple at the party had just announced their pregnancy, and the group erupted with excitement, offering congratulations and parenting advice. It was the kind of conversation I had grown used to avoiding. But then someone turned to us. "So, when are you two finally giving us a baby to spoil?" The words were innocent, said in a light-hearted tone, but they carried more weight than they should have. Susan laughed. Then, without hesitation and loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "Harvey? Oh, please. He's not even man enough to get me pregnant." A thick silence followed. The laughter stopped. Conversations died. A few people glanced at me uncomfortably, while others awkwardly pretended they hadn't heard. But I had. And there was no pretending this away. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her to stop or ask why she would humiliate me like that in front of people we both knew. I simply stood up and walked away. I wasn't angry at that moment. I was done. There was nothing left to fight for. When I got home, I walked straight to our bedroom, pulled out a duffel bag, and started packing. I took only the essentials, clothes, my wallet, toiletries. I didn't know where I was going yet. But I knew I wasn't staying. After zipping up the bag, I took one last look around before stepping out of the house that had once felt like home, but now felt like a cage. I checked into a hotel across town and turned off my phone. For the first time in a long while, there was no tension. No forced small talk. No second-guessing every word that left my mouth. Just silence. And for once, the silence felt peaceful. The next morning, I turned my phone back on. A flood of messages came through. Friends who had witnessed what happened texted, asking if I was okay and offering to talk. Then there were Susan's messages. One from last night. "Where are you?" Another from that morning. "Are you hurt because of what I said?" It was just the drink. I stared at the screen, reading her words over and over. No apology. No remorse. Just an excuse. I didn't respond. And when she realized I wasn't going to, she didn't bother texting again. A few days after I left, Susan finally saw the letter I had written and left on her dresser that night. It read, "I stayed through everything, the fights, the disrespect. But if even my greatest pain is a joke to you, then I have no place here." I knew she had read it because she sent me a message. I don't know what she felt when she read it, But I do know one thing. She hadn't expected me to really leave. Maybe she assumed I was just angry and needed space. That I'd be gone for a few days, a week at most, before coming back like nothing had happened. But after reading that letter, she must have realized just how serious I was. At first, I thought she had ignored it. She didn't reach out the first day, or the next. But then the messages started. The calls didn't stop. When I didn't answer, she started reaching out to mutual friends, asking them to talk to me, to convince me to come home. But I had made my decision. I wasn't going back. Then, about a week later, she received the divorce papers. That was my final answer. I wasn't going to argue, plead, or fight anymore. I was done. I didn't owe her any more explanations. After leaving, I moved to a new city and started over. It wasn't easy at first, adjusting to life alone, rebuilding myself from the ground up. But in time, I found peace. I learned to enjoy my own company, to let go of the pain I had carried for so long. More importantly, I learned that I was more than my ability to have children. Then I met Naomi. She was different, kind, supportive, understanding. We took things slow. And for the first time in years, I felt truly wanted. A year into our relationship, Naomi sat me down one evening with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes, excitement, nervousness, maybe even a little fear. Then she said it. "Harvey, I'm pregnant." The moment the words left her mouth, my mind scrambled to process what I had just heard. At first, I let out a small laugh, assuming she was joking. But when she didn't smile, when she just sat there, waiting for my response, the amusement disappeared and confusion took its place. I stared at her, trying to make sense of it. Pregnant? How? That was the only thought running through my mind. I shook my head almost instinctively. That's not possible. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. Out of nowhere, Naomi was telling me she was pregnant. My mind jumped to the only explanation that made sense at the time. She had to be cheating. I remember the way Naomi's face twisted with hurt when I accused her. She was offended, but she didn't yell or cry. Instead, she calmly told me she hadn't been with anyone else. She was sure, 100% sure, that I was the father. But I wasn't about to take any chances. I had been through too much to just accept something that didn't seem possible. I insisted on a paternity test. Naomi didn't hesitate. She agreed right away, telling me I could do whatever I needed to feel at ease. Still, as we waited for the results, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on me. If the test came back and confirmed my worst fears, it would shatter me. But if, by some miracle, it proved I was the father, then what? When the results finally came in, my whole world tilted. I was the father. I must have read those words a dozen times, but they still didn't feel real. I sat there in shock, my hands gripping the paper, trying to understand how this was even possible. The doctors had been so certain before. My sperm count had been too low, my chances close to nothing. And yet, here was living proof that something had changed. The very next day, I booked an appointment at a fertility clinic. I needed answers. I needed to know if this was a one-time miracle or if something inside me had truly changed. The tests confirmed what I once thought impossible. My fertility had improved significantly. Whether it was the lifestyle changes I had kept up over the years, the passage of time, or something science couldn't quite explain, my body had done what I thought it never could. I was no longer infertile. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Susan, my ex-wife, had just been patient, if she had held on a little longer instead of letting her frustration push me away, we could have had the family we always dreamed of. But as I stood there, looking at Naomi, I realized something. I had no regrets. My past marriage had been built on pressure, disappointment, and unspoken resentment. But with Naomi, things were different. She loved me, without conditions, without expectations. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I have no idea what happened to Susan after I left. I never reached out, and she never tried to find me. Maybe she moved on and had children. Maybe she regretted everything. Or maybe she convinced herself she had done nothing wrong. I don't know. And to be honest, I don't care anymore. Some things don't need to be revisited.
Some doors are meant to stay closed.
I'm not bitter about the past. In fact, I'm grateful. Life gave me a second chance. I found someone who values me for who I am, not for what I can or cannot give. She stood by me without conditions, without passive-aggressive remarks, without making me feel like I was never enough. Looking back, I see things clearly now. Love isn't just about being together when things are good. It's about staying when things get hard. It's about patience. It's about choosing kindness, even in frustration. Susan had the choice to stand with me, to be my partner in the struggle. But instead, she chose to humiliate me. And that's the kind of thing you can't take back. Words leave scars. And the ones said by the person you trust the most? Those cut the deepest. If there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this. Patience and respect matter. If you truly love someone, you don't throw their pain back in their face, no matter how frustrated you are. You don't humiliate them, especially not in front of others. And you don't let temporary emotions ruin something that could have been beautiful. But in the end, I'm glad things turned out the way they did. Because I ended up with someone who truly loves me for me. That's my story, folks. I hope you take something from it. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Do you think Susan deserved another chance? Or was walking away the only option? And if you know someone who needs to hear this, make sure you share it with them. Until next time, take care.